It is Wednesday night. That means Browns Insider. We got Tom Reed with us tonight, along with Branson, Wright. And the Johnny Manziel era maybe has begun. You guys were trying to figure it out here right before we came on, if it has officially begun or if we're still waiting till Sunday. But regardless, Johnny Manziel, no big surprise. He's going to be the starting quarterback on Sunday against the Cincinnati Bengals. I do wonder, though, Tom, do you feel like Mike Pettine was seriously considering Brian Hoyer, or was it inevitable at this point that it was going to be Manziel?
I think it was inevitable. I think as soon as they kind of got out of the race, so to speak, I mean, they're technically still in the race, but as soon as they lost that game the other day, I think it was pretty clear that it was going to be Johnny Manziel, unless Brian played really well, which of course he did.
Yeah. Is this a case of them just seeing what they have in Manziel, or do they believe that Johnny Manziel gives them a chance at the playoffs?
I think it's a combination of both. They weren't going to go to Connor Shaw, as far as just throwing anybody in there, but they have to see what they have. He's a first-round pick. See what the kid has, and the way Hoyer's been playing or has played as of late. It was time for a change. So I think it was a little bit of both.
Now, Mike Pettine has taken some criticism about not starting Johnny Manziel last week against Indianapolis. But the way it kind of worked out for him was he gave Brian Hoyer one more shot. Brian Hoyer didn't take advantage of it. It made the switch very easy. Do you think there was a little bit of that in his decision last week, that he was going to give Brian Hoyer a little bit of rope, kind of see what he does with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no question about that. He'd ridden them to 7 wins, and just I think that as long as they were really in the forefront, I'll go as far as to say, even if they found a way to win that game yesterday or last week, and he had thrown even another interception, I think Brian Hoyer would have still been the quarterback here. I think as long as they were in the, really, really in the race, they're going to tell you differently because they can't say we're out of it now.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
But reading between the lines, I think that was kind of what they were doing. And look, they can still finish with 10 wins if Johnny's able to deliver, or 9 wins. That's a nice season for this team.
Yeah, and they would kind of accomplish not only a really nice season, but they would know what they had in Brian Hoyer. They would know a little bit about what they have in Johnny Manziel. Not everything, but there's still certainly, even if you think the playoffs aren't a possibility, there's still certainly something to be accomplished this season.
It is, and I just want to go back what Tom said. I mean, you know how close that Hoyer could still be the quarterback right now?
A Josh Gordon gator arm.
Right.
Or a tackle at the goal line.
Yeah.
I mean, if the Browns have Boom Herron trapped, if they make that play, I think Brian Hoyer. I mean, I may be wrong, but I think Brian Hoyer would still be the quarterback right now, especially given the fact that he's already beaten the Bengals twice.
Yeah.
And then the Atlanta game, and if he didn't have that last drive, and they get the field goal, then
maybe then
the same thing.
And I mean, even after that Buffalo game, as poorly as he played, and they lost that game, Coach Pettine decided to stick with Brian Hoyer. So
yeah, I think this is a perfect timing. I think you really need to start seeing what you have here. Now, you can't have a full proper evaluation in 3 games, but 3 games is a nice, especially if you get one or the other. Say if he plays really well, you go into the offseason thinking, hey, I think we've got something here. If he plays really poorly, then you're thinking, most likely he's going to play somewhere in between, I think.
And I think it was time for a change also. The defense played just balls out. I mean, they except for that last play. And where's that guy from? Was he from Warren?
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, they just played so good. And then it was just the same thing happening on offense. And they sputtered, and Hoyer just couldn't make the right play. So I think as far as the defense is concerned, it's like, what the heck? Let's get a new guy. Let's see what he can do. But the question is, will Hoyer come back in this season before the season's out?
yeah, I mean, with the way Johnny plays, he's going to run around a little bit. You know what can happen.
Yeah, well,
There's a very good chance we have not seen the last of numbers.
How many times did we think we saw the last of Brandon Whedon last year?
Yeah,
and he kept
exactly.
resurfacing like a sub.
And we've already seen Johnny laying on his back at the goal line after taking a shot like that.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
you hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But and even Brian Hoyer mentioned that today. He may not have seen the last of me, so we'll see. We'll see what happens.
looking at Johnny Manziel, obviously there's a lot of people who are saying things like, well, they would have beaten Indianapolis had Johnny played. Their record would be this had Johnny Manziel played. We don't obviously know that. But because of that, there's some raised expectations for Johnny Manziel. I think there are a handful of people, at least, that expect him to go out there and be great on Sunday. What is a reasonable expectation for him?
You think? I mean, people were ready to give him the MVP before the season started. You know, the Johnny mania. You know, before it all started. But I think, you know, a lot of people that's been in Johnny's camp all year long. I mean, you had the Hoyer camp and you've had the Manziel camp. And this is their opportunity to see their guy that they've put on a pedestal that he's going to be the next coming. But we're certainly going to see, and in these next 3 games, or at least one game, depending on what happens to him, we'll get a chance to see if he is the guy.
I mean, what are you expecting, Tom? I kind of look at it and I see a situation where, you know, I was talking to Branson. He could account for a couple of touchdowns. He could also account for 3 or 4 turnovers.
Yeah, he's the kind of, you know, especially as a young guy coming in, he's going to be able, may keep both teams in the game. Yeah. It may be one of those games, but you're hoping that he does more positive than negative. And I mean, let's be honest. I mean, you can't expect this kid to just come in and win games on his own. I mean, you hope for his sake that he goes out there and gives a good representation of himself. Get the running game going again. They got it going. I thought that, you know, they were able to run the ball a little bit. They ran for over 100 yards last week. Use the running game. I think he can be a weapon in the red zone, running the ball. And let's just see what he can do. I just would not go out there and expect him to throw for 250 yards and run for another 75 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think that's unrealistic. The Bengals have a good defense. Yeah. As badly as the Browns beat the Bengals last time, you think about it, it really wasn't. It wasn't that they were just pouring on offense. They ran for almost 200 yards in that game, and the defense just made Andy Dalton look awful. It'll be a good test.
Yeah. No, we haven't heard from Kyle Shanahan this week. Obviously, he usually speaks on Thursdays. But earlier in the season, Kyle Shanahan kind of talked about having that dual threat quarterback and kind of what it does to a defense, what it does for him. Of course, this is a guy who had RG3 in Washington. What are we going to see out of this offense this week? What kind of tweaks are they going to make?
I think there'll be some. I don't think, you can't redo your entire offense in week 14 for even a quarterback. Yeah. I think you'll see some tweaks. I think you'll probably see a few design runs. You think about it, Brian Hoyer was already doing a lot of the rolling out, sometimes in the pistol. Yeah. So that's stuff that we're used to seeing Johnny do anyway. Again, a lot of rolling out. But at this point, when he's rolling out, he can take off at the same time. Yeah. So even Mike Pettin today was saying that, you know, there's definitely going to be some changes, but we can't, you know, you just can't change an entire offense this late in the year.
I mean, it's welcome to the improv with Manziel, and that's where the advantage he has over Hoyer, and that's just been his MO. He doesn't necessarily have to run for the first downs, but just extend the play, just run around, guys get open. I mean, what he did in college, I think you'll see a lot of that on Sunday.
Now, I remember in the scrimmage specifically at the University of Akron, we saw a little bit of that read option. We saw a little bit of it in the preseason. Is that something you can go back to 14 weeks into the season, or is that too far gone in a lot of these guys' minds?
No, I think so. I think you can go back. As long as it was already in the playbook, as long as you were working on it in training camp, I don't think it takes that much to go back and do some of those plays. Again, you're not going to, you know, I wouldn't expect to see 15 different plays on Sunday. And also, as Branson mentioned, a lot of this stuff is kind of extending plays. It's not necessarily direct runs. Yeah. I want to see, though, I do want to see him, if he does start to take off a little bit, to keep his eyes down the field. You know, that's one of the things that Russell Wilson does so well, and what to me has gotten Colin Kaepernick in trouble. That Colin Kaepernick, when he takes off, his first thought is to run. Russell Wilson is still going through his progressions. He's able to think and run at the same time, and that's what makes him so dangerous, and that's why he has enjoyed, I think, a little bit more success than RG3 and Kaepernick.
And that's not bad for a little guy that can do things like that.
Here we go.
Let's not get ourselves in a Marvin Lewis situation here, Branson. You look at Johnny, and one of the criticisms coming out of college was, you know, he's a guy that kind of drops back, makes a read, and then takes off. We saw a little bit of that in the preseason. We didn't get to really see enough of him in Buffalo to see if that habit is gone. Is that also something to really watch for? Because, you know, again, you go back to preseason, you did see moments where he dropped back, maybe wouldn't be comfortable. He'd make that first read, maybe a second read, and then he was gone, for better or worse.
I'm sure that's what they've been working on this week, or what they're going to work on this week is look at more than just your first option. Look for the open guy, and as Tom said, keep your head up before you take off, because somebody can get open, and that's I would say the concern of a young quarterback, a rookie quarterback, that he's just going to do what he's more comfortable with, and with Manziel coming in this situation, it might just be running the ball.
What do you think? How far along, and obviously, again, we don't see Manziel, but how far along do you think he's realistically come in 13, 14 weeks?
No, I mean, I do. I think that's one of the reasons I think so many people are excited to see him, because we really aren't sure.
Yeah.
You would hope that that's been part of what they've been working with him. I contended all along that this was, long term, this was going to be the best thing for him, to just have a nice long stretch where he didn't have to play, where he could stand back, learn a little bit about the position at this level, and kind of what it means to be a pro. And we'll see if he's taken and is going to make use of this time that he's had.
And I think it's a good thing for him, too, that he sat behind a guy like Brian Hoyer, who we've seen as a limited quarterback, but he works his tail off and prepares like crazy. And, in a situation like last week, Johnny Manziel saw how Brian Hoyer played against Buffalo and still saw that the coaches stuck with Brian Hoyer. And I think that's certainly something he can learn from as well, that he was sitting behind a guy who isn't a great quarterback, but on preparation and hard work, he kept that job for a long time.
I mean, not only, sitting behind Hoyer, but, being there with Shanahan. He's proven to be one of the better coordinators. I mean, he's having a great year in my estimation, as far as being a coordinator. So, so his time sitting back and being able to observe, and I think it's just the right time, these last 3 games of the season, for him to get in and then show what he can do.
Brian Hoyer, have we seen the last of him in Cleveland? Is he gone at the end of the year, assuming Johnny Manziel keeps this job the rest of the year?
I think so. It'll be interesting to see. Obviously, he is, to me, has proven that he can play in the NFL. And maybe there are teams out there that will look at this and say, you know what, given the right circumstances, maybe we could use him as a starter. I don't think there's many teams out there that think that, but I know that there are going to be a lot of teams that say, this guy can win us 4 or 5 games if we lose our starter. And there's guys around the league, you think of Tony Romo as one of them, or some other teams around the league that have quarterbacks that do tend to get hurt, that he's going to be fine. I mean, he's not going to get the huge payday that maybe he had hoped for, or that maybe some were calling for at mid-season, but he'll be fine.
I was one.
Oh, you weren't alone. Yeah, you weren't alone. And you know what? There's people that you could say that could have made that argument, especially when you have a coach like Bill O'Brien down in Houston, who's got a good team, doesn't know for sure what he's going to do with his quarterback, may have lured Brian down there, and still may.
Yeah.
If they can't find anything better, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I mean, he's a guy that, if you're on a good team, and we saw it earlier in the year, a good running game, a good defense, and just don't make mistakes. Just manage the game, which he was doing a great job of that early in the year. So if a team like Houston, if they get better,
and they are getting better,
and then they add Hoyer in there, and Hoyer could just be a stopgap guy. Just he's there until they get the quarterback that they want. But he definitely has a career in this league. Is either a guy temporarily as a starter or as a career backup.
But there's no way he could stay in Cleveland as a backup. Do you think he would be willing to do that? I'm sure the Browns wouldn't mind having him as one, but...
Well, it'll, of course, again, we say this, so it will depend on what the market offers him. Maybe he doesn't want to stay here knowing that, again, I would think that he and his agent Joe Linta would sit down at the end of the season and look for the most fortuitous spot for him to land, either as a place where, hey, the quarterback situation isn't either settled, or B, there's a place where a guy tends to get hurt a lot and he can play, and maybe that's here. Maybe at the end of the day, if Johnny Manziel doesn't play great these last 3 or 4 weeks, maybe he decides to hang on here. I don't think that is the case, but we'll see where we are in January. As Brian Hoyer said yesterday, things change quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
maybe
3 weeks in the
Washington.
NFL is a long time.
Right.
As we've seen since the Browns last beat the Cincinnati Bengals. They moved to 6-3. They were first place, and now here they are, 7-6, playing the Bengals again. What's different this time around? The Browns beat the Bengals. It was 24-3 on November 6th. What's different about this Bengals team this time around?
If I'm not mistaken, the guys are healthier now. They had some guys out on defense for the Bengals, and I think some of those guys are back. But is Andy Dalton still the quarterback? I mean, you don't know which Andy is going to show up. So depending on which Andy shows up in Cleveland, that's going to me, that's going to determine who wins this game.
Obviously, the Browns, again, if they're going to keep any kind of hope alive, they have to win. Obviously, a lot of it's surrounding the excitement of Johnny Manziel, but this is an absolute must game for the Bengals. This, to me, is I don't want to say it's an elimination game because they could still be only a half game back, but when you look at their schedule to close out against the Broncos, on the road against Pittsburgh, who they've already lost to, they have to have this game. And so you've got to think that the Bengals are probably feeling a little tight right now. This is a huge game for them. I think they've lost the last 2 or 3 years here. So this is a big game for the Bengals.
And if you're the Browns, you can't win this division unless you beat Cincinnati this week and you beat Baltimore at the end of the season. Everything's a must-win at this point for the Browns, so it's a huge game for both sides.
This is this is to me their only route to the playoffs. I don't think they win all those tiebreakers in wild cards. They have to win this game. They're still going to need help. I believe they'll still need help because the Baltimore they'll still be even in games. And again, the thing that people sometimes forget in this, they're not a game behind Baltimore and Pittsburgh. They're 2 games or a game and a half behind those teams because they lose the tiebreakers. And even if they beat Baltimore, they'll have been even. And the same with Pittsburgh. They'll be even in games. And I do believe that it goes to conference.
I believe it's conference.
And that's not
it's either mutual record against mutual opponents or conference. I can't recall.
It's not a, of course it would be 2 more wins if they were to be able to win out and beat those 2 teams in the division, but it's still, to me, that's their best route.
Yeah, bottom line, they just have to win. I mean, that's what they can control, is that they just have to win these 3 games. And if they don't make the playoffs, not a bad record. Who would have thought that they would finish like this? And it gives them some momentum going into next season.
They have to win. They've got to win at least 1 game. I mean, to get to 6-3 and not win 7 games, there's just a little bit of, yes, you almost doubled your win total, but you got to get to 8 wins. You got to have a winning season, I think, this close. And no Cam. Let's not look too far ahead, but no Cam Newton next week. Can you imagine if they would win this week and lose to Derek Anderson?
Yeah, Derek Anderson.
Would that be the ultimate Cleveland thing?
In his hands this time in another
The
uniform.
revenge of the ex-Browns.
It's interesting. We talk about the division. I'm looking at it. You mentioned Pittsburgh has at Atlanta versus Kansas City, and then they play Cincinnati. For Baltimore, they've got Jacksonville, at Houston, and then the Browns. Cincinnati's in the lead in this division, but it seems like Pittsburgh and Baltimore are really in the driver's seat in this thing when you kind of look at their schedules and you look at what they have in front of them.
I mean, it's typical Cincinnati, and you mentioned that it's a must-win for them, and when they're in that must-win situation, like the playoffs, Cincinnati falls through. So it is going to be interesting what happens on Sunday, because it's definitely a must-win for the Bengals.
The only good thing that the Browns have going for them with the Steelers are the only team in the AFC North that did not get the memo that you're supposed to beat all the NFC South teams. They've lost twice in that division, which is their record this year. If they miss the playoffs, they will have lost to Tampa Bay, they will have lost to the New York Jets, and they have lost to the New Orleans Saints. And that, I mean, if they miss the playoffs with those 3 losses, oh my goodness.
And it's exactly the reason that a team like the Browns, if things go their way, could make the playoffs, because they kind of got fat off of those teams. And then you throw Oakland into the mix and some of the other bad teams they've beaten, they've been able to take advantage of.
Yeah, they've had their trouble. Where the Browns have had their trouble is in the AFC South.
Yeah.
I think they've lost 2 or 3 times.
They lost to Indianapolis.
3 times.
Beat Tennessee.
Jacksonville.
Yeah, lost to Jacksonville.
Okay, Houston.
I lost to Houston.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 3 losses in the division. That division. And again, when we get back into the tiebreakers, that's where the AFC record just kills you.
Yeah, and that's where that loss to Indianapolis really kills you too, because you're already, and Buffalo as well, because you're already falling behind.
And in Pittsburgh, I don't think they're going to do well in Atlanta, and their defensive backs are just going to have trouble, and then that'll be another loss to a team with a poor record for them.
Yeah, but Baltimore to me seems like they have the
Momentum.
They seem to have a little bit. They've got the things going in the right direction. You're right. Pittsburgh, you just don't know. Pittsburgh and Cincinnati are just so up and down week to week. Baltimore seems to be. Although, again, Baltimore loses 2 weeks ago to San Diego, right?
Yeah.
At the very end of the game. So we'll see. I think we're just going to have to wait and see. But all the Browns can do is try to keep winning.
All right, some other things to kind of go over that have cropped up this week. Josh Gordon, of course, a lot of people talking about his effort Sunday, his effort against Buffalo. Are you guys worried about what you've seen out of Josh Gordon?
It's funny because the coaches and everyone said before he came back, we can't expect this guy to be tremendous right off the bat. And he was in his first game back.
Oh, yeah.
And then you're thinking, everything's fine. It's just end of last season, here we go. And since then, it's kind of been a rocky couple games, and last week especially. At the end of the game, he can't quite come up with a play. He wasn't on the same page with Brian Hoyer. I'll be interested to see how he and Johnny Manziel meshed and see if that works. But yeah, it's slow, and I will say this in Josh's defense. We talked to Jordan Cameron today, and Cameron was got back finally after 3 or 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. He said my legs were wobbly. It was great to be back out there. It's great to be healthy again, but I wasn't basically in football shape. So maybe there's something for that with Josh that he's dealing with too. But it's certainly something, Dan, you keep your eye on.
And if Josh has a good game and really meshes well with Hoyer, then I want to question what was going on with him and Hoyer. Maybe there was some frustration there, because some of those passes were, ground balls, and they were definitely off. One guy would zig and one guy would zag with his throws. So if he and Johnny are just on point, then you just have to question on what was going on with him and Hoyer.
And you do wonder a little bit if Johnny maybe sees Josh Gordon, sort of that Mike Evans like he had at Texas A&M, where he'd scramble around and
throw it up.
Evans would get loose, he'd throw it up, let him go get the football. I mean, that's probably what the Browns had in mind too when they went out and got Johnny Manziel. We'll see if that actually happens. The other topic, of course, is the kicking situation. Billy Cundiff having a very difficult season, to say the least. In the last 2 weeks, he's missed key field goals. They tried out a couple kickers last week. Haven't really heard anything about new kickers this week. It seems like it's going to be Billy Cundiff the rest of the way, but how much confidence do you guys have in him?
It's funny because that was last season after they got rid of Phil, or after Phil, they didn't re-sign Phil, and Phil went and signed in San Francisco. It ended up being one of the biggest non-stories of the season because everyone thought, oh my gosh, they're going to really miss this guy. And Billy Cundiff, he's not going to be able to do it, and he's going to miss some field goals. And it became a non-issue. All of a sudden this year, down the stretch, it's become an issue. Yeah. And it's kind of the thing that people were worried about last year, late in the season, in cold weather games, what's going to happen here. And it has become an issue. There's no question about it.
Well, your question was how concerned, how concerned are we, or how concerned is the staff? Because I definitely thought the staff would be more concerned and have some other guys trying out this week, but apparently they didn't. But I tell you what, if he missed some key kicks on Sunday, then they either have to make a change or just say, you know what, season is over anyway, and we'll just ride it out.
And Joe Banner not making a lot of victory laps on Twitter over getting rid of Phil Dawson, at least. He loves to do victory laps over a lot of other things he does. Certainly not that one this season. And you just know, I mean, the way this is going to play out, right? Billy Cundiff is going to have a shot to win a game in Baltimore that could maybe get the Browns in the playoff discussion. That's just how this has to play out with his history there and what he's done this season.
Yeah, it's the Browns hope that they get to would love to, it'll be interesting to see where Billy ends up next season. But yeah, it's been a tough year for the kicking game. It's been their special teams has been so weird this year. One unit has two units now have They've been excellent covering kicks. They've been excellent covering punts. They did a really nice job on Josh Cribbs. But from just getting long snaps back to kickers to, the punting game's been fine, but you just wonder, the whole accumulation of issues in the kicking game this year has been very difficult for them to kick, and it's lost them games. It's lost them one or two games.
Branson and I were talking about this before we came on. We don't know how to pick this game. I don't know who to pick in this game. I guess I'm kind of leaning towards the Bengals right now. Tom,
Who you got, Tom?
Any idea which way you're going?
I have not really put this into thought yet. And don't hold me to this. I think I will probably pick the Browns because they've beaten them the last couple years here. Joe Hayden does such a good job against A.J. Green. He has. It's one of the guys that he's played really, really well against, and Joe's been playing well with the exception of one pass last week. But, of course, you just don't know with a rookie quarterback. I'll reserve judgment, but for the course of the show, I'll take the Browns 24-23.
I'm just going to wait to see what you pick, and then I'm going to just mimic you. I think you're leading our staff picks.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the Bengals will have a little bit of revenge factor. Who was that made the comment?
Jeremy Hill.
Jeremy Hill, said that they weren't that good. So I think there's going to be some motivation there. They have a lot on the line, which scares me because when the Bengals have something on the line, they fall. And then Andy Dalton, you don't know what you have there. Manziel, you don't know what you have. So for the sake of the show, I'm going to take the Bengals. I'm going to take the Bengals 27-21.
Yeah, I don't have a score. I'm leaning Bengals. It's one of those Johnny giveth, Johnny taketh away situations. I'm just worried that there'll be a little too much of what we saw in that second drive in Buffalo. We'll see a little bit of what we saw in that first drive, but what we saw in that second drive worries me. I just don't know if they're going to have enough to overcome some of those rookie mistakes. So I'm kind of leaning towards the Bengals right now. All right, that'll do it, guys. Another Wednesday Browns Insider. We got one more of these left next week. For Branson Wright and Tom Reed, I'm Dan Labbe.